Salam, salam, salamat. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. May Allah forgive me for everything that is about to come out of my mouth. I actually started making this video at 3 AM this morning because I couldn't sleep. Here's a little flashback to what I look like. Salam ya Hawate. My name is Manal. Salam ya Hawate. Salam ya Hawate. Okay, there's not much difference. But basically I decided that I should get some proper sleep and I should get myself together before I make this video. And that's because I'm about to talk about stuff that I've always avoided talking about. Mainly because I try to stay out of Ethiopian politics except for when it directly relates to Eritrea. Now that we are potentially on the brink of war, I've tried to bury my head in the sand, locked all my doors and crawled up in the corner of my room and hoped that it would go away. And I disappeared for days, if not weeks. And I really just hoped it would go away and that it all wasn't real. But it didn't work. Pro-government supporters, can you please tell me how you do it? How you bury your head in the sand and act like everything's okay and just pray that things will get better without actually doing anything about it? Because I tried it and it didn't work for me. It didn't work. Can you give me lessons? I mean, you guys are pros at that. Teach me, because I'm going crazy over here. And so many of us are going crazy. There are actually a lot of things that I want to talk about, but I'm just gonna start off one at a time. For this video, I want to speak directly to something that Abiy Ahmed said in his video that he released online to justify his airstrikes on Tigray. He said a lot of things. It's like an 8-minute video. You can go watch it. The link is down there. But I'm going to talk about one particular thing that he mentioned because I think it's really interesting.
One of the key pillars of the reformist agenda of my new administration was upholding the rule of law. The TPLF old guards have continuously mounted both covert and overt attempts to undermine the people of Ethiopia and our new...
He continuously referred to the Constitution and his responsibility, or the federal government's responsibility, to uphold the constitutional laws, to uphold the rule of law, and to put an end to impunity.
They sponsored, trained, and equipped any force that was willing to engage in violent and illegal acts to derail the transition. Arrest warrants by federal courts were ignored in an open contempt for the rule of law, and serial obstruction of justice became the hallmark of the TPLF.
Impunity is being above the law, so being able to get away with breaking the law. Which, let's be honest, for a long time while TPLF was ruling the country, TPLF was getting away with a lot. They were able to get away with just not adhering to the constitution that they created themselves. It was the first government since the revolution, and it was the first attempt at democracy that Ethiopia ever had. I was a huge criticizer of TPLF when they were in power. We fully hold TPLF accountable. This is not a defense of TPLF for any country, whether it's Eritrea, whether it's Ethiopia. I don't care at all who rules, who you are, doesn't matter to me. I care that the people in the country have access to the freedom and self-determination that they deserve. All people in the country. I don't care if countries change and evolve, if they separate. I don't care who leads. I don't care what language is spoken. I care about people's rights. And I wish I didn't care about this, but you are potentially starting a war that could drag my people, the Eritrean people, an army fully made of conscripts, of people who have no choice but to be in the army. You are potentially starting a war that will put all of those people in danger, as well as millions of innocent people who are in your country, who are your constituents. So Abiy Ahmed refers several times to his role of defending the Constitution. So I took it upon myself to get the Constitution so that we could refer to it. I've got the link to the Constitution. It's available online. It's down in the description. I printed this version. It's the exact same one that you can read. I think it's important that we all read this. I'll start off by acknowledging that I am not a law student. I studied international relations, so I have a basic understanding of how the world works. The rest of what I've learned has been through reading books, learning, and asking questions. But I understand that there are gaps in my knowledge, and if somebody is willing to contest the things that I am saying in this video by actually looking at the Constitution and providing evidence and laws, I welcome it. I'm not here to act as though I am the right person, the only right person. Everything that I'm saying now, I'm sure has been said before. I'm okay with being wrong. I am talking because I think that it's about time that our community started having mature, conversations about what's actually happening in the region. And if you actually want to see progress, you've got to know the facts and you've got to be able to talk about it. If we don't even know the laws and regulations, then of course these governments can pull the hood over our eyes. Of course they can brainwash whole populations. Abiy Ahmed did not substantiate any of the claims against the TPLF. The only thing that he said that could be proven was that Tigray held elections. Bas. And his claims that Tigray holding elections were unconstitutional is exactly what I want to talk about right now.
The TPLF doubled down on their unconstitutional assertion, and in a blunt violation of the constitution, TPLF adopted its own illegal electoral law, an illegal electoral commission, and conducted an illegal election in which it won all the seats in the regional council.
If we find, by looking at this constitution, that his actions are founded, then we can allow him to do his federal duty. I want to start off by going to, so he talks about how we have to respect the division of powers between the federal government and the state governments. The states in this conversation refers to the regions. There are 9 regions as indicated by the constitution. They can be found in Article 47. Now in Article 47, Part 2, it says, nations, nationalities, and peoples within the states enumerated in sub-article 1, that is the list of all of the states, they have the right to establish at any time their own states. So these regions exist, but it's up to the state itself and the people in that state to decide whether or not they will establish their own state. Now, if we start off, Tigray has obviously established its own state. I think that they secured that while they were in the federal government. Tigray is officially a state, and they have that right as per the constitution. We'll move on to Article 50, where it specifically has the structure and division of powers, which is what Dr. Abiy Ahmed was referring to. You can read all of this in your own time, and if you find that I've missed anything in this video and you want to add it, you go ahead. I'm only highlighting the things that I think are really relevant to this conversation. The TPLF didn't attempt to hold a national election. They didn't attempt to overthrow the national government. They held a state election. In Article 51, if you have a look, it says all of the things that the federal government is responsible for. And they all seem pretty reasonable. None of them really stand out, except for this one here, which we'll come to, and that is sub-article 16. It says that the federal government has the power to declare and to lift national state of emergency and states of emergencies limited to certain parts of the country. I want us to think about that one, because that shows that the government is perfectly within its rights to hold a state of emergency. We'll talk about what a state of emergency is and what the government is allowed to do in a state of emergency in a moment. But before we do that, I want to go to Article 52, where it says the powers and functions of the states. The first thing that it states is that any powers that are not given to the federal government belong to the states. So anything that is not in this list of 21 specific things that the federal government is responsible for is up to the states to determine for themselves. Have a read of it yourself. I'm not making this up. Now, if we go to sub-article 2A, the state has the power to establish a state administration that best advances self-government, a democratic order based on the rule of law to protect and defend the federal constitution. The federal constitution says right at the beginning in the preamble, this constitution is to ensure self-determination of all the peoples and nationalities of Ethiopia. Now, if we read this again, to establish a state of administration that best advances self-government, a democratic order based on the rule of law. Right now, I still don't see TPLF doing anything wrong. I think that the Tigray state elections were not only within the realm of their rights within the constitution, I think that their actions were a defense of their constitutional right when the federal government was trying to remove their rights. But maybe that's just me. The elections in Tigray came out with a unanimous vote for TPLF to lead Tigray. We know that TPLF have rigged elections before, but right now it's kind of undeniable that the Tigrayan people trust TPLF more than they trust the federal government. And I think that them actually participating in the regional election rather than sitting it out because it was unlawful and they're anti-TPLF, I think that that says a lot. Now we're going to get to the interesting part, because so far I think that we've established by looking at the division of powers and where states sit, it's very clear that so far Tigray has not broken any constitutional law. Now, if they said that they just broke the law and then they told us exactly which law that they broke, that would be different. I would be having a different conversation. But he specifically stated that this was constitutional law. I want to go back to that point that we said about the state of emergency. To understand the state of emergency, we have to go all the way to Article 93, the Declaration of the State of Emergency. All of it is pretty standard, makes sense. I want to go to Part 4. This is where it gets interesting. When a state of emergency is declared, the Council of Ministers shall, in accordance with regulations it issues, have all necessary power to protect the country's peace and sovereignty and to maintain public security and law and order. B. The Council of Ministers shall have the power to suspend such political and democratic rights contained in this Constitution to the extent necessary to avert the conditions that required the declaration of a state of emergency. So basically, during a state of emergency, which the government has the right to claim when it sees any kind of threat to the sovereignty of the nation, fair enough. If it's saying that TPLF broke the constitutional law and they're trying to undermine the sovereignty of the nation, if they say all this stuff, first of all, they have to prove it. But second of all, let's say they're going to prove it later on and they've decided that they're going to call the state of emergency. During a state of emergency, basically, the government has the power to remove all of these constitutional rights. They can get rid of all of these, except, and this is where it gets real. This is, see, directly after that, in the exercise of its emergency powers, the Council of Ministers cannot, however, suspend or limit the rights provided for in Articles 1, 18, 25, and sub-articles 1 and 2 of Article 39 of the Constitution. Let's go and look at what those articles are, because these are the non-negotiables. So even in a state of emergency, these things cannot be compromised. Article 1, the nomenclature of the state. So that's just the name of the state. Easy. No one's trying to change the name. Article 18, the prohibition against inhuman treatment. That is number 25, the right to equality. All persons are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to the equal protection of the law. In this respect, the law shall guarantee to all persons equal and effective protection without discrimination. So can we think of any situations where there were some people who were perhaps imprisoned, not protected by the rule of law, disappearances, we still haven't heard from them? Can we think of anything like that that's happened in the past 6 months? If you, dear Prime Minister of Ethiopia, are going to talk about defending the rule of law as per the Constitution, then you have to be an example of upholding that exact Constitution. The last of these constitutional rights that cannot be compromised during a state of emergency, sub-article 1 and 2 of Article 39 in this Constitution. Go have a look at that. Read this, because this is where it gets real interesting. Article 39. Rights of nations, nationalities, and peoples. 1. Every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia has an unconditional right to self-determination, including the right to secession. Sub-article 1 is what I want to focus on. Every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia has an unconditional right to self-determination, including the right to secession, even during a state of emergency. That is the states, the nations, nationalities, and people in Ethiopia, they have an unconditional right to self-determination, including the right to secession. Now, self-determination, I would say, I think that it's indisputable, and if I'm wrong, tell me, that the region of Tigray holding an election for their region, I would say that that is part of their unconditional right to self-determination. If I'm wrong, tell me. It's not like they ousted the president. It's not like they ousted the prime minister. It's not like they took to the streets of Addis Ababa and tried to hold their election there. And not only does this say their right to self-determination, it says the right to secession. Do you know what secession means? Secession literally means to remove itself from the Union. They have a right to remove themselves from the Ethiopian. They have a right to become an independent country. That's literally what it says in this Constitution. So even during a state of national emergency, even when the government is trying to tell them what to do, they still have the right, according to this Constitution that Abiy Ahmed, you seem to be reading directly from, they have a right to apply to become their own country, as does any of those 9 regions. That's in your constitution. That's in your rule of law. I'm having a really hard time understanding how Tigray actually broke the constitutional law. And if I'm wrong, maybe there's more laws in Ethiopia that are not reflected in the constitution, that maybe there's laws that you've created that undermine the constitution, because that's what they would be doing if they reversed these rights. They would be undermining the constitution, which is undermining the rule of law, which is exactly what you're saying you're trying to stop by fighting.